Well, we're going to be in Nehemiah chapter 12 this morning. So I'd encourage you to turn there. But as we start and as we're looking into that, I first want to talk about a few years ago, an opportunity that I had to go to an Ohio State football game. Now, I did not go to this football game in Columbus, but rather I went in East Lansing. So many of you may know that's Michigan State. Going to see the game there at that time, it was a lot closer for me, and someone had tickets, and it was last second. They're like, the game's tomorrow, do you want to go? And how do you say no? And so to an offer like that. Now, I have to be honest, the weather was absolutely horrible. It was freezing cold, snowing, and kind of like freezing rain mix as we were going. So the traveling was difficult and we were bundled up, but man, I tried to get as much of my scarlet and gray on the outside of all that warm clothes that I had heading into East Lansing. Now, there have been some years where Ohio State has struggled with Michigan State, but it was not one of these years. And so this year, the game was firmly in hand fairly quickly as Ohio State was dominating the game. And by the fourth quarter, it felt like there were only Ohio State fans left. Now, the fans, you could tell that because of the colors that were being worn, but you could also tell because in the stadium, you started hearing the chant around the stadium, O-H-I-O, just like when you were at a home game. And so if you know, that chant goes through, and you could start to hear that taking place in East Lansing at an away game. So not only was this chant present at home games, but it also made its way to an away game there. Each section is now loudly cheering near the end of the game, this O-H-I-O. Now the game concludes, and there is high-fiving of different individuals that have no clue who each other are, but they have this common bond through cheering for their team. These people gathered to watch their team. They came in appropriate colors, at least from my standpoint. There was a lot of green that was there also. But there was a lot of rejoicing that was heard when their team was firmly in the lead and the outcome was secured. Strangers, as they high-fived, made a sense of brotherhood as they celebrated the accomplishment of their team. Cheering, rejoicing. As we read through this chapter in Nehemiah, I almost can sense that sort of feeling where there's this rejoicing that's going on because this is something that's been looked forward to. This chapter is essentially the pinnacle of the book as they dedicate these walls. If you remember all the way back to chapter 1, these walls and their destruction are what bring heartache to Nehemiah. They walk through and they're rebuilding this together, a sense of brotherhood and commonality that we want to follow the Lord this way. They endured hardship as enemies came at them. They endured rejoicing as they see God doing a miraculous work and having the walls being rebuilt faster than humanly possible. And now they come to a time of rejoicing. Rejoicing before the Lord, rejoicing that He is the one that has done the work in rebuilding the walls and used the people. That's this chapter in Nehemiah. We think of the songs that we just sang. I stand amazed. How wonderful. How marvelous. Singing songs about what God has done. Now, the people in Nehemiah, they're rejoicing in God's rebuilding of the city so they can have refuge as a people and God's name will not be defamed any longer. But we also think of amazing grace. What we have to rejoice for, rejoice over different than what they did, but again, rejoicing in what God has done, not us. We're going to read Nehemiah chapter 12 together. So I would encourage you, if you are able, to stand with me for the reading of God's word this morning. Once again, just like to emphasize, this is the pinnacle of the service. Reading his word, hearing from our Lord. So let's read Nehemiah chapter 12 together. And it says this, starting in verse 1. These are the priests and the Levites who came up with Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, Sariah, Jeremiah, Ezra, Amariah, Malach, Hattush, Shechaniah, Rahum, Meremoth, Iddo, Ginnathoi, Abijah, Mejamin, Maadiah, Bilgah, Shemaiah, Joiarib, Jediah, Salu, Amok, Hilkiah, Jediah. These were the chiefs of the priests and of their brothers in the days of Jeshua. And the Levites, Jeshua, Binnui, Kadmiel, Sherebiah, Judah, and Mattaniah, who with his brothers was in charge of the songs of thanksgiving. And Bakbukiah and Uni and their brothers stood opposite them in the service. And Jeshua was the father of Joachim, the father of Eliashib, the father of Joiada, the father of Jonathan, and Jonathan, the father of Jaddua. And in the days of Joachim were priests, heads of their fathers' houses, of Sariah, Meriah, of Jeremiah, Hananiah, of Ezra, Meshullam, of Amariah, Jehohanan, of Maluki, Jonathan, of Shebaniah, Joseph, of Harim, Adnah, of Marioth, Helkiah, of Iddo, Zechariah, of Ginnathan, Meshullam, of Abijah, Zikri, of Benjamin, of Moadah, Piltiah, of Bilgah, Shemua, of Shemaiah, Jehoatham, of Jerob, Mattani, of Jediah, Uzi, of Sali, Kalai, of Amok, Eber, of Hilkiah, Hashabiah, of Jediah, Nathanael. In the days of Eliashib, Johanan, and Jaddua, the Levites, were recorded as heads of their fathers' houses. So too were the priests in the reign of Darius the Persian. As for the sons of Levi, their heads of the fathers' houses were written in the book of the Chronicles until the days of Johanan, the son of Eliashib. And the chiefs of the Levites, Hashabiah, Sherebiah, and Jeshua, the son of Kadmiel, with their brothers who stood opposite them to praise and to give thanks according to the commandment of David, the man of God, which watch by watch, Mattaniah, Bakbukiah, Obadiah, Meshullam, Talmon, and Akub were gatekeepers standing guard at the storehouses of the gates. These were in the days of Joachim, the son of Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, and in the days of Nehemiah, the governor, and of Ezra, the priest and scribe. And at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem to celebrate the dedication with gladness, with thanksgivings, and with singing, with cymbals, harps, and lyres. And the sons of the singers gathered together from the distant surrounding Jerusalem and from the villages of the Netophathites, also from Beth Gilgal and from the region of Geba and Asmaveth. For the singers had built for themselves villages around Jerusalem. And the priests and the Levites purified themselves, and they purified the people and the gates and the wall. Then I brought the leaders of Judah up onto the wall and appointed 2 great choirs that gave thanks. One went to the south on the wall to the dung gates, and after them went Hoshea and half of the leaders of Judah, and Azariah, Ezra, Meshullam, Judah, Benjamin, Shemaiah, and Jeremiah, and certain of the priests' sons with trumpets, Zechariah the son of Jonathan, son of Shemaiah, son of Mattaniah, son of Micaiah, son of Zachar, son of Asaph, and his relatives Shemaliah, Azarel, Milalai, Gilalai, Mai, Nathaniel, Judah, and Hananiah, with the musical instruments of David, the man of God. And Ezra the scribe went before them. At the fountain gate they went up straight before them by the stairs of the city of David, at the ascent of the wall above the house of David to the water gate on the east. The other choir of those who gave thanks went to the north, and I followed them with half of the people, on the wall above the tower of the ovens to the broad wall, and above the gate of Ephraim, and by the gate of Yeshana, and by the fish gate, and the tower of Hananel, and the tower of the hundreds, to the sheep gates, and they came to a halt at the gate of the guard. So both choirs of those who gave thanks stood in the house of God, and I and half the officials with me, and the priests of Eliakim, Messiah, Minimin, Micaiah, Elunlianai, Zechariah, and Hananiah with trumpets. And Messiah, Shemaiah, Eleazar, Uzi, Jehohanan, Malchijah, Elam, and Ezer, and the singers sang with Jezreiah as their leader. And they offered great sacrifices that day and rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. The women and the children also rejoiced, and the joy of Jerusalem was heard far away. On that day, men were appointed over the storerooms, the contributions, the first fruits and the tithes, to gather into them the portions required by the law for the priests and for the Levites according to the fields of the towns. For Judah rejoiced over the priests and the Levites who ministered, and they performed the service of their God and the service of purification, and did the singers and the gatekeepers, according to the command of David and his son Solomon. For long ago, in the days of David and Asaph, there were directors of the singers, and there were songs of praise and thanksgiving to God. And all Israel in the days of Zerubbabel and the days of Nehemiah gave the daily portions for the singers and the gatekeepers, and they set apart that which was for the Levites, and the Levites set apart that which was for the sons of Aaron. We did it. You may be seated. Excited for this passage. Let us pray and ask for God's leading as we go through it this morning. God, you are good. You bring about blessing that we do not deserve. You care for us and provide for us in ways that we do not understand. Lord, we see that taking place not only today, but many, many, many years ago, even in the time of Nehemiah. Lord, help us to learn from what we read in the book of Nehemiah today. Guide us through the study of this chapter. Encourage us and encourage our hearts to be giving you praise this morning. We pray these things in Jesus Christ's name. Amen. Now, looking through this passage in chapter 12, what we're going to do is we're going to study a little bit more in depth the middle. So we're just going to give an overview at the very beginning. Again, that's all those names again, and the very end, two different sections, but we're going to focus our time on the middle and what's going on there. Just as an overview, verses 1 through 26 and all the names that we see mentioned there, it's assumed that that is a collection of a couple different lists of names. That they've looked, whether it was from Zerubbabel's time, a couple that he's used lists before. So it's kind of like a collection of these lists as they look at, we are now time for celebrating. Who are the ones that are joining us? Who are the ones that are here and present in this celebration this morning? So that's kind of that first section. There's differences when you see kind of the other list mentions, a couple names added, a couple names removed, but overall we see it very similar to previous lists. It specifically focuses on what are the lists of the Levites and the priests that are present, those that lead in worship. Verses 44 through 47, the very end of the chapter, outlines some responsibilities that have been given to the people for the practice of worship. What do we need to be collecting for the Levites? Who are these different roles that we have for the worship that's taking place? So it mentions the people that are doing worship, and then how do we provide for those people that are responsible to lead us in worship. Then that brings us to our passage in verses 27 through 43 this morning of the chapter. The big picture that we're looking at in this chapter is that the people gather to celebrate what God has done. What God has done in the completion of the walls. The restoration of the city is complete. There has been some restoration that's been going on in the people's hearts. All things appear to be pointing to a wonderful future for the nation. The first thing that we notice about this celebration, and there's a couple different parts, is that there is appropriate preparation that needs to be had. So that's our first point this morning, the preparation for rejoicing. Now, there's two specific preparations that we see mentioned in verses 27 through 30. The first is that the right people need to be present. The right people need to be present. They needed to gather the Levites. Now, you know they aren't collected at Jerusalem. They've been working at this, but Jerusalem hasn't been the center of worship since the walls have been broken down. So when it mentions they've built villages and towns and other places around, but these are God's designated people to lead in worship. And they say, if we're going to do worship, we want to do it God's way. So let's have the right people present. Let's have the right people there. The Levites are key to worship, and Nehemiah, and his priority to do things the right way, gathers these people together. The Levites are those designed ones to lead worship. Nehemiah wanted them brought back to this place and wanted them to be a part of this great time of celebration. Getting any old person to lead, whether it's Nehemiah or someone else, would not have been sufficient because that's not as God designs. The second of the preparations that we see for this time of rejoicing and celebration was purification. Verse 30 says this, and the priests and the Levites purified themselves, and they purified the people and the gates and the wall. Purification is something that is very significant to God. You look in the Old Testament before this, and you look in the law, you see that there are great lengths that people had to go through to be purified. Great washings that they had to go through. And we even see in the New Testament talking about this, the idea of a pure heart coming before the Lord in that way. So purity is significant. Much is written about the law of clean, unclean, and how to purify yourself after various times of being unclean take place. So as part of the preparation, they took the time to purify themselves. Not only themselves, but the people, the walls. And so it was significant. Purification could have involved multiple things. A few things that it probably did were a ceremonial washing. Ceremonial washing, some process that they had to go through at this time. Now, they also could have had, for part of the purification process, is abstaining from sexual intercourse for a set time and the washing of their garments, making sure that the person and what they are wearing are clean. We see purification also happening with the sprinkling of blood, which could have taken place on the walls that were there. But it was significant to have purification. This purification process involved a lot, especially for the priests that would have been there. The ones that had the sacrifices would have been responsible for that. It was significant. Being pure in God's eyes isn't only important for worship. We see Achan did not follow instructions as the nation of Israel crossed into the promised land and they were battling Jericho. God gave the city into their hands, and there was a lot of good things that Jericho had, a lot of wealth, and God said, destroy it all. Don't save any of it for yourself. So Achan took it, hid it, and he was unclean, did what was wrong. And this unclean act, this act of sin, didn't just impact himself and his family, but it impacted the nation. As the nation went to the next battle with a much smaller place, said, we got this. The Lord delivered us from a massive city. We can do this. And they were defeated, and many people died. Being pure is significant. We briefly mentioned last week Ananias and Sapphira, who, as part of the church, sold some of their property as many others were doing, and brought the money to the apostles at the time for the use of caring for other people's needs. Now, that's a good act. That was commendable. Sell something to help others. But in their hearts, they said, well, we want to keep some of it back, but we want people to still think that we're giving it all. So we'll tell them we sold it for this price, but really we sold it for much more. It was impure. It led to their death because they were deceptive and had impure motives in their worship. Impure motives in worship is significant. This is why we take such great precaution in our worship, trying to see how does God design worship? What are things that how He instructs us, rather than saying, hey, this would be fun, let's add this in. This would be kind of cool if we could add this element to worship. We got to say, how does God desire to be worshiped? Let's pursue that. Let's make that our goal. One way is through communion. Something we don't take lightly. 1 Corinthians 11 warns us against taking communion in an unworthy manner. This comes right after the explanation when he says, hey, this is what's going on in the Corinthian church. Some people come to communion and have this great feast. They gorge themselves. They're getting drunk on the wine that they bring. And then you have people over here that don't have as much, and they're being shamed because no one's sharing with them. No one's allowing them to participate in this communion celebration together. They say that's not the way it's supposed to be. You celebrate as a church family together, caring for one another. You do not shame one another. It condemns some of the people for humiliating those who have nothing as they carry on their business as normal. They were only concerned about themselves and had no desire to care for the needs of others. That was completely against what the church is called to do. It was impure. What does this mean for us? It means we do have to regularly check our hearts, see our motives, see what we're doing, seeing are we prepared to come to worship? Are we prepared in our personal time reading God's word so He can speak to us and share with us what He desires us to know? My dad, one thing that was significant for him growing up, and so in the house, is he said, we protect Saturday night. We protect Saturday night because that's preparation for us coming to God's house and meeting with God's family on Sunday morning. So we aren't out late. We're making sure we get rest. We're making sure things are done well on Saturday night as part of that preparation. It's significant. Part of this preparation, what it means for us is we confess known sin. We turn from temptation. I want to read for us a passage of Scripture from David, one that he penned, one that he wrote, one that was his response when it came to how do we deal with sin and temptation, even after, in his case, it was after he had sinned. This is Psalm 51. I would say listen closely to these words. It really needs no commentary, as it's plain and it kind of cuts to our hearts. This is what David had to say. Have mercy on me, O God. According to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against you and you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your words and blameless in your judgment. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, you delight in truth and in the inward being, and you teach me wisdom in the secret heart. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence and take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and uphold me with a willing spirit. Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will return to you. Deliver me from blood guiltness, O God of my salvation, and my tongue will sing aloud of your righteousness. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth will declare your praise. For you will not delight in sacrifice, or I would give it. You will not be pleased with a burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. Do good to Zion in your good pleasure. Build up the walls of Jerusalem. Then you will delight in right sacrifices and burnt offerings and whole burnt offerings. Then bulls will be offered on your altar. Those are the words of a man that understands the importance and the value of purification, coming right after he sinned with Bathsheba. His decision, his willful decision to sin, and he says, this is the response after Nathan confronts him. Is that our response? Do we have a similar heart for purity? Saying, God, I want to come to your house, come to your people, come worship corporately with a clean and pure heart. Participating in communion when we have it with that pure heart. When we sin, do we respond like this? So we are ready to come before the Lord with rejoicing. Are we prepared? When the people in Nehemiah are prepared, when they've gone through this preparation time, we see in verses 31 through 42 a certain heart that they had in worship. And this brings us to our second point, the heart of rejoicing. The heart of rejoicing that we see here is that it's a heart of thanksgiving. The people are thankful. We see before this section that it does talk about thanksgiving. It talks about the two choirs that are split up in two. Those are choirs that are giving thanksgiving. And even later on in the passage, in that back section, it talks again about thanksgiving. What's going on in this section is Nehemiah gathers the people. The Levites are gathered, they are ready, and he splits them into two main groups. These two groups he sends off with Ezra leading one of them down one part of the walls. They're walking on the walls that had just been built. They're walking on the very thing that they are celebrating. They're walking on the thing that had been a point of heartbreak, but God had done a work. So now one group's going on one side of the walls, and then Nehemiah gathers with the other sides, and with the Levites ahead of them leading this procession of singing and praise and thanksgiving, they walk around the walls, kind of surrounding the city on these walls, and they are singing praise to the Lord. Singing praise out of a heart of thanksgiving because they know those walls would not have been completed without the help of God. At least not completed in the time that it took. They had a heart of thanksgiving that led to this significant rejoicing. How often do we see what is around us as God's provision and grace, rather than that's just what happened to me today? How often do we take time to specifically look and say, what's God doing? How is he moving? How is he acting? What are things that are coming up? How is he leading me through his word? Kelly and I were married just before I started my senior year at Cedarville. She had just graduated, and she was working at Cedarville in one of the departments there while I was finishing up my degree. And in our time living together, newlyweds, just married, we were living the good life. And so it's always good, that honeymoon period. Now for us, the good life did not really include money. Just because we were newly married, we didn't have a whole lot to our name, but we enjoyed living life together. Now, shortly before graduation, we had received a financial gift. It was a significant blessing just because we didn't have a lot to our name, and it was unexpected when it came, so that was significant. Just after I had received that gift, again, this was just before graduation, I had already accepted a position at a ministry position up in Michigan. Right after receiving that, I made the trip up to Michigan to pick out an apartment. Me and my brother went. Kelly trusted us. She's never trusting me with that again. But we went up there and we looked and we found one, at least I found one that I thought this would be suitable for us. So again, she trusted. It was significant. But afterwards, we had to go and sign some papers, and you never know how expensive starting off in an apartment is until you start to sign those papers, and they're like, you need this deposit, you need this, you need that, and you're like, we're going through, and that list is getting longer of the money that we're gonna need to have an apartment, and I'm thinking, I just got a job, I'm getting ready to graduate, this is supposed to be a little easier, I think, I'm not supposed to be fretting this much. But as it came and we're signing those papers, it ended up that the amount that we owed for that apartment was almost the exact amount that we had received in that financial gift. Now, we could have had a couple responses. We could have been like, bummer, we were planning on using that for something else. Why did this have to happen? Or we can respond and say, isn't God amazing? We didn't have this money before this, but he gave it in an unexpected way, and now we can come and do this without having stress and pressure in living in our new apartment. That was a significant time for me in just seeing God's provision, something I will never forget. Again, it's this idea of how are we going to respond? Do we see what God's doing? Do we respond with that heart of thankfulness and joy and rejoicing as he goes through restoration in our lives? Now, we could spend a lot of time looking through the Bible and just saying, what does it have to say about being thankful? We could be here for a couple weeks looking at all the different passages, because we know that we're supposed to give thanks always from 1 Thessalonians 5:18, in all situations in Ephesians 5:20, when we enter into worship in Psalm 100 verse 4, for God's goodness in Psalm 107:1, for the inexpressible gift that he gave in 2 Corinthians 9:15, and so many other reasons. Reasons why we give thanksgiving, situations in which we are to give thanksgiving, qualities of God that we're told to be thankful for. We could go through all of that, but really overall it shows us that we are to have a mindset of thanksgiving. It's a mindset that God is the one that's in control. He is the one that orders our days. He is the one that brings about all that is good in our life. It takes the emphasis and the focus off of us and puts it on God. We have him to thank, not ourselves. He is the reason why we have hope and a purpose. Do we take time both privately and corporately to give thanks? When we wake up, do we say, man, I'm thankful for another day? When we have a meal, do we thank him for his provision? When we turn up the heat on a cold day, we didn't have to do that yesterday because it was nice and warm, but today, again, we're reminded it's still February. Are we thankful and saying, God, thank you for providing for that? When difficulty comes, do we thank him for not leaving and forsaking us? When a brother or sister is no longer with us, do we give thanks that they are in God's presence? When a marriage is restored, do we give him thanks for another chance to do things the way he describes, rather than what we desire in marriage? When we gather as a body, do we give him thanks for being able to worship and study the Bible together, corporately, freely, publicly? The people were being led in giving thanks for God's provision of the walls. They raised their voices and sang praises to him. We too need that thankful heart in rejoicing. Now, the people did not stop, as we look in our passage, with that song and that procession, and it would have been a great celebration. That wasn't the only thing they did. Rather, that brings us to our final point this morning, the act of rejoicing. The act of rejoicing. The heart of thankfulness for the people led them and drove them to action, not just singing praise. But verse 43 is part of the final verse of our section, and I want to look at it one more time. It says, "And they offered great sacrifices that day and rejoiced, for God made them rejoice with great joy. The women and the children also rejoiced." We're going to stop there for right now. These hearts of gratitude in this time of praise led them to offering great sacrifices. Not normal sacrifices, but it mentions great sacrifices. Now, we have to remember of the context again. You go back to Nehemiah chapter 5, and big portions of these people are saying, we don't have provisions even to feed our family because of the difficulties that are going on. You have some of the farmers there that are saying, the drought has been severe, we do not have crops. These people are not living in abundance like they would have during the time of King David, but rather they're barely making it by. But their hearts are so driven and so thankful because they truly understand what God has done that it leads them to leading and giving great sacrifices. These are exiles that have returned to the land. Their primary city, the walls have been broken, and they are thankful, even in the little that they have, to give great sacrifices. This sacrifice was not only given by the leaders, not only the Levites, but it says all the people, and specifically mentions the women and the children also were a part of this rejoicing, a part of this sacrificial attitude. So just like we saw earlier in the book multiple times, the word of the Lord being read was for all people. So also is this time of rejoicing through sacrifice. For all the people, not just the religious leaders, not just the heads of households, but for everyone that made up the nation there. Sacrifice is a difficult word. By its nature, we understand that it costs us something. There is something that is given for a specific purpose, something that is spent for that purpose. I recently finished a biography of someone that was doing missions in Somalia years ago during the kind of the peak of its wartime. And he said, we were traveling around the nation. It was in great peril. There's fighting going on all over. And they're saying, we're looking to see what needs can outside organizations come in and try to help meet. And he said, I came across this one city. There were only children. Only children. The parents, they saw some of them walking outside the city, had just fallen down in exhaustion because they gave all the food to the kids. They sacrificed because they said, the next generation is worth it. If we're going to survive, we want to survive through them. So there were only children when this kind of relief team came in, and all they could do at that time was explore the needs. But they tried to meet those needs even in just this exploratory process, saying we need to get these kids some food and need to get them some safety, get them to some people that can care for them. The sacrifice of the parents was done because they saw this is a worthy thing to sacrifice for. We love and care for our kids in such a way that we will give up the cost for us and our lives to care for them. It was a significant cost because they saw their children as a worthy cause. We need to think about, how do we live? do we really sacrifice? Is our giving considered sacrificial if we're giving out of extreme abundance? Are there times when it costs us something to the point where we say, man, if we do this, we can't do this? Even if it's, man, we probably can't go on that vacation we were wanting to do because maybe we see some of our global partners, they have this need that comes up, and we want to sacrifice for the causes of our Lord. Do we sacrifice? Doing some yard work for a person may mean that we don't have that time for leisure. Taking some time to invest in discipling relationships means we won't have that time to do things that we want at that specific time. Teaching God's word to some of our children means that we won't be able to go to one of our Equip You classes where we get to rub shoulders and be encouraged by other adults at that time. Sacrifice takes on many ways that it can be done, whether through finances, and we've talked a little bit about that, but sacrificing our time. Are we willing to give time in a busy world where we've got schedules and everything's booked up? Are we willing to sacrifice to say, man, I think the Lord wants me to do this, so I'm going to give up doing this instead, because that's of more value. Giving great sacrifice. The question really comes down to, what do we see as valuable? We will give time to things that we give value. If we give value to our family, we're going to spend our time and resources on that. Time with our friends, we're going to spend time and resources with that. Do we sacrifice for our church family and for the Lord? Do we see value with that? Do we see this big picture and how God has saved us? Not by anything that we have done. Are we driven to have a heart of gratitude and to give great sacrifice in our rejoicing because it's so worth it? The results of the great sacrifice and rejoicing is found at the end of that verse that we were reading earlier. The end of verse 43 says, "And the city of Jerusalem was heard far away." How far is the joy of the Willetts family heard? Is it heard outside of our walls? Do people around us know we're praising the Lord because of what He has done? How far is the joy of Southgate Baptist Church heard? Does it make it outside of this sanctuary? Or do we keep it bottled in because we like to sing in here and it's good? Do people outside of these walls know and hear? Does it go beyond the exterior walls so the people in this county hear about it? The people in this neighborhood know of our rejoicing of what God has done as we call them and say, hey, He's done this for us. He can do it for you also. This is almost like living next to a high school. And I had some friends that did, and they said, man, on a Friday night, the football game's going on, you know absolutely when every score is going to takes place. You don't have to look at the scoreboard. You hear it. You just know, you hear the roar of the crowd as a touchdown takes place. The neighborhood all around it says, oh, something good must have taken place. Let's pray that our rejoicing and sacrifice will cause such a stir that our joy will be heard from far away. The county will be asking, what's going on over there at that gathering of body of believers? Why are they so joyful? What is this great sacrifice that we are hearing about? It's all because of what God has done and is for His glory. Let's pray. God, we are thankful to see the rejoicing that has taken place in this chapter. rejoicing because you provided, you cared for your people, you worked in mighty ways. And they responded saying, "Thank you, God." And it was heard from far away. God, we pray that you would prepare our hearts for rejoicing, making sure that we come and are pure before you. We pray that we would have a heart of rejoicing that is filled with thankfulness. And we pray that we would be driven out of love for you to be involved in the act of rejoicing and giving great sacrifice. We love you very much, Lord. We pray these things in Jesus Christ's name. Amen. Before we go, real quick, next week is our final week in Nehemiah. I would encourage you read it before we're here. Some of you are. The book would have been so much happier if we stop in this chapter. But God gave us another one. We see the rest of the story, and that's going to serve, one, it's going to sober us, but it's going to be a challenge for us as a church. So read it, be encouraged by it, even though it's depressing. It's hard, but we will be encouraged and challenged by it next week. Go in peace this morning.